Good morning. Welcome to the HOC Budget Finance and Audit Committee meeting of February 17th. I'm Rick Nelson, Chair of the committee, joined by my colleagues, Fran Kelleher to my left and Lefkowitz to my left. Sorry about that. And our executive director, Chelsea Andrews, and a host of staff. First item on today's agenda are the minutes of December 21st. And I will entertain a motion for approval of those.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. The first item for discussion is the fiscal year 2023 second quarter budget to actual statements. And I guess starting the presentation will be the Executive Director, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, members of the public, and HOC staff. We are presenting to you the second quarter budget to actual statements. You will note in our report that we are continuing to experience losses, primarily due to bad debt, the timing of some of our transactions, as well as increased expenses. I want to acknowledge some of the steps that we are taking to address the bad debt issue. Of course, the commissioners, you all are aware that beginning in March, we will be pursuing lease enforcement activity with our residents who have outstanding debt, but not without doing so in a manner that allows them to gain access to as many resources as possible. We sent notices out to all of our residents, encouraging them to participate in and or join us in a series of meetings on access to resources, one of them being the CDBG rent relief program. Last night, we hosted our first community meeting. Over 100 attendees joined that session. It was a really great meeting and an opportunity for them to learn about that program. We expect a uptick in applications. We also have 2 additional sessions that will be taking place over the next few weeks. Our property managers are also trained and highly engaged with residents to encourage them to take advantage of that resource if it is a good fit for them. We also, in our presentation, provided information about our resident services, even if you weren't delinquent in rent but hadn't taken advantage of some of the resources, encouraging our tenants and our residents to take advantage of those resources as well. So our intentions are to really fully maximize the CDBG funds, to also utilize the additional county resources that we received, and only after utilizing all of those resources, move forward with lease enforcement activity as needed with our remaining residents. And so we really hope that this outreach effort yields a positive result instead of displacement. But because we haven't had lease enforcement activity in over 2 years, we are seeing the impact of that in our bottom line. And so wanted to share that with you all. I'll be also reporting this information out more formally at the upcoming board meeting, but also just wanted to give kudos to the team. Yesterday's meeting went very well, and I think also was a great example of another way that we can communicate with residents, considering the participation rate. And so with that, I will turn it over to our acting chief financial officer, as well as our budget officer, Tim and Terry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director. Good morning, Commissioners. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Getzinger. I'm the acting CFO, as well as the Chief Development Funds Officer. And the first item today will be presented by Terry Fowler, our Budget Officer.
Good morning, Commissioners. As Tim mentioned, Terry Fowler, the Budget Officer, and I will be discussing the second quarter budget to actual statements for fiscal 23. Overall, on page 14 of the packet, the agency ended the quarter with a net cash deficit of approximately $590,000. This resulted in a second quarter budget to actual negative variance of $944,000 when compared to the anticipated second quarter surplus of approximately $335,000. The primary causes were lower unrestricted cash flow in some of our Opportunity Housing and Development Corporation properties as a result of property performance, coupled with lower income in the general fund that was partially offset by savings in various expense categories in the general fund. Moving on, continuing on page 14, the general fund ended the quarter with a deficit of approximately $3.5 million, which resulted in a positive variance of just under $1 million when compared to the projected deficit of $4.5 million. Income in the general fund was $2.6 million less than projected, and this is primarily the result of the delay in the receipt of commitment and development fees for the Metropolitan, which will be shifted into FY24, and the development fee for the Leggett and residents on the lane. The opening of the Leggett is now anticipated in the second quarter of the calendar year and will result in the payment of the initial development fee at that time. Delays in the lease up at the residents on the lane delayed achieving stabilization earlier in the year. That is now slated for mid-2023, and we do anticipate receiving that fee this year. We've also had lower draws from the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund for the funding of personnel and pre-development costs in real estate. The positive expense variance in the general fund of $2.3 million is primarily the result of lapse in salary and benefits coupled with savings in professional services, computer software, maintenance contracts, COVID expenditures, and savings in capital projects, which resulted in lower transfers from the operating budget to cover the cost of those planned projects. The bond funds have positive expense variances in both funds resulting from lapse in salary and benefits. Moving on to the next page in our packet, we'll look at page 15, and this is the Development Corporation for the property. It is split into unrestricted on the top and restricted properties on the bottom. The first group of unrestricted development corporations generated a cash flow of approximately $2.23 million, which is $945,000 lower than projected. As our executive director mentioned, the items that are impacting this are higher maintenance as we return to the units to determine the work needed, increases in our bad debt expense due to the non-payment of rents that we are working to address, higher utility costs, and increased vacancy at some of our properties. Moving to the bottom of the schedule for the restricted properties, this property group had a generated cash deficit of $482,000, which was $146,000 more than what's projected for the and they are also affected by the same items that we discussed, primarily the bad debt in maintenance in the RAD6 property. Moving on to page 16 of our packet, the top portion is
I know when we were doing the budget for this year, we talked about expecting to find higher maintenance needs once we were able to get past the COVID protocols and actually inside of units. Is what we're seeing beyond what we budgeted for in terms of that? Or are we simply some of this a timing issue of we're seeing it earlier in the year than we expected? Can you?
I really need to defer to the maintenance division on this, but I do know that the cost of contracts has increased more than we could have anticipated, and the cost of materials also has increased at a much higher level. We see that same thing happening in our development projects, that the costs have just risen at levels that we could not have anticipated.
Okay, so some of the issue is inflation rather than just the level of maintenance that's needed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and there are places where we've experienced issues that have happened in properties that require emergency maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. As I said, moving on to page 16 of the packet, our unrestricted opportunity housing property generated approximately $665,000 of cash flow to the agency, which is just under $1 million lower than anticipated. And we are experiencing the same issues that we discussed. And with these properties, these include the majority of our scattered site properties, which has an increased exposure to maintenance because of the nature of the units and not having it all on site. The bottom portion of this schedule is the restricted properties for the agency and opportunity housing, and cash flow for that group was about $409,000 lower than anticipated. If there are any specific questions related to our properties, I'd be happy to answer those, or we can move on to the public side.
Not a specific question related to problem, but a general question. I'm assuming in some of these cases, we'll see changes as we move on because of maybe reimbursements of some of those arrearages.
Yes.
But in terms of the maintenance expenses, they're going to stay where they are. I guess my real question is, do we think that with other savings and with the operating reserves that we have, that we will have sufficient monies to cover that deficit in the operating reserves?
Staff is looking at that at this time. We are looking deeply at our properties to determine where we will end it here. And we are also looking at anticipated fees that can assist in that. I do feel that we have sufficient money in our reserve. The hope is that we can turn some of these things around. We are working on applying the rental assistance, as you mentioned, for the bad debt, and that coupled with the lease enforcement is the plan to turn some of that around and take some of this bad debt that was established in 23 and reverse it. We do not yet know the impact of that because, as we discussed, there has been a continuing growth in those arrearages. So we are collectively looking at that. And we're also looking closely at the budget that we're going to present to you in April to ensure that we're being realistic in those budgets as to what the anticipated cost in the units will be as it relates to maintenance and capital, and using our available funds such as our internal reserves and the county money we get for improvements in our scattered sites to ensure that we're adequately planning for that and addressing the needs as quickly as possible.
Related question, I guess, and Chelsea, thank you for leading off with that because this was obviously some of our questions, but I guess a lot of it sounds like this is a hangover apart from COVID related economic crisis and just a lot of stuff that we weren't able to get to or couldn't do because of and what I guess I'm trying to understand is this a situation where we're going to do our best to mitigate some of these losses, but we're going to just sort of have to take our lumps and move through it, but then we'll be done with it? Or how much of this should we expect to see? Are there underlying ongoing issues that are going to keep these losses or expenses elevated? I mean, there's the inflation. I'm glad, I was going to ask, are we expecting to be through it in this year's budget? Will we see it in next year's budget as well?
So I do believe that we will continue to see some of this in next year's budget. When we developed the 23 budget, it was our hope that we would have been able to receive the rental assistance sooner than we did and get that applied and get lease enforcement going so that we could move back to a normal operation. I do think that the maintenance, as we're just starting to get into the units with over 700 scattered sites, it is going to take time to get in all those units. I do anticipate that we will see the maintenance costs continue for 24. It's the hope that we can pull back on some of this bad debt that we're experiencing and get back to a more normalized arrearage balance. But I defer to Executive Director Andrews and or other staff in the audience to add to that.
I think also with bringing on our new Director of Asset Management, where his main goal and responsibility is to understand how each of these assets are operating, will shed some additional light where we may have properties that we recognize have low occupancy and trying to address the occupancy, the turnover, our rent collection activities. And so he's joined us. It is his #1 task to get to the bottom of what some of the challenges are above and beyond just rent arrearages with the management of these properties. And also with us entering into new property management contracts here in the near future as well, including the provisions that we've discussed in terms of oversight and our monitoring of how they're handling our assets will also help improve the outcome. I do believe that when we come back in April with our full comprehensive budget, we'll also be able to identify where we do have assets that generally speaking have been challenged and what our solution will be for those.
It seems to me that, and I think Jeff has started down this road, what this really suggests is that we do have to be extremely careful in our estimates for the 24 budget. I mean, inflation is nothing that we at HOC can control. And hopefully it will not get worse, but we've got to see to what extent we can really anticipate it. The level of maintenance, I mean, again, all these things we're learning this year, and it's a hard lesson. It's a hard lesson that we're learning, but we have to use those lessons for next year. And also the other thing is, of course, timing. Some of the payments that we haven't received, we will receive before the end of the year. So those deficits will be overcome before we reach the end of the year. But I look forward to the next meeting where we can hear a little bit more what your analysis is in terms of where we think we're going to end the year. Okay.
If there are no more questions related to our properties, we'll move on page 17 of the packet, which is the public fund and our housing choice voucher program. Overall, there was a surplus at the end of December of approximately $948,000. That was comprised of housing assistance payment revenue that exceeded our expense by $64,000 and an administrative surplus of approximately $884,000. The surplus in the payments will be restricted to the reserve for the future HAP expense. And the surplus in the admin was a combination of additional fees that we have received due to higher proration and additional monies we received for the COVID and emergency vouchers. And the savings in expense is primarily due to staff turnover and savings in salary and benefit lapse. And that is a restricted program, so that surplus will be restricted for future administrative uses in the program. And then on the final page of your packet, page 18, you can see that we do have a few properties that have expended their capital budget and exceeded their total capital budget for the year. A lot of this was due to unanticipated work and preparing work for the inspections at our properties. For the multifamily, we do have sufficient reserves for the properties, and we are also looking at the work in our scattered sites. Although they are not over budget, we do want to ensure that whatever work can be rightfully charged to our county funding is charged there so that we can have sufficient reserves for the impending work that we see coming in the future. I'd be happy to address any other questions you have related to the second quarter.
Are there any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to join with the staff in recommending this go forward to the full commission for acceptance.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion is approved. The next item on the agenda is the FY 2023 second quarter unaudited financial statement. Again, I'll turn it over to Executive Director Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will turn it over to Tim Getzinger, our acting Chief Financial Officer, and his team to provide an overview.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Executive Director. Francisco Vega, Assistant Controller, will be presenting this next item. Francisco.
Good morning, Commissioners. If we can scroll to 20 or 50, I believe we're there. Awesome. Thank you. The Commissioner's net position decreased 8.5 million or 2.9% attributed to the net operating loss during the first 6 months of FY 23. Based on the liquidity ratios, they've improved due primarily to a decrease in the multifamily bond fund undrawn proceeds payable due to additional bond draws for HOC at Westside Shady Grove, HOC at Stewarttown, Bauer Park Apartments, HOC at Georgian Court, HOC at Shady Grove, and HOC at Willow Manor. In December of 2022, the current ratio was 3.78 as compared with 2.68 in June of 2022. The quick ratio also increased from 2.5 in June of 2022 compared to 3.44 in December of 2022. The total assets, excluding the deferred outflows, decreased by 42 million or 2.1% from 2 billion in FY22 to 1.9 billion in FY23. The decrease in total assets was largely due to a decrease in restricted cash and cash equivalents, unrestricted cash and cash equivalents, and net capital assets, partially offset by an increase in mortgage and construction loans receivable. The decrease in restricted cash and cash equivalents is mainly due to additional draws from the undrawn bond proceeds within the multifamily bond fund for several real estate development under construction, as well as a decrease in the single-family bond fund short-term service. The decrease in unrestricted cash and cash equivalents is mainly attributed to the general fund annual disbursements for commercial liability insurance, property taxes, and Yardi annual license and maintenance, and an increase in advances to several component units due to the timing of payments and reimbursement of expenses through the central disbursement system. The decrease in net capital assets of 8 million is primarily attributed to the normal depreciation of fixed assets. The overall net increase of 17.7 million in total mortgage and construction loans receivable is due to additional PNC real estate line of credit draws for Elizabeth House 3, HOC at Upton 2, and the Wheaton House Gateway development. The total liabilities decreased largely due to bond draws for HOC at Westside Shady Grove, HOC at Stewarttown, Bauer Park, HOC at Georgian Court, HOC at Shady Grove, and Willow Manor. Additionally, the single-family bond fund redeemed and retired bonds for 10.7 million under the 79 indenture, 3.5 million under the 2019 indenture, and 2.1 million under the 2009 indenture. Lastly, the multifamily bond fund redeemed and retired bonds for 4.5 million under the multifamily housing bond 1996 indenture, 0.6 million under the standalone bond 98 issuance. If we can scroll down to page 21 of 50. Perfect. Thank you very much. The Commission had a net loss of 8.5 million as of the second quarter ending December 31st, 2022, compared to net income of 70.6 million for the same period last year. However, after adjusting the net income for the recording of capital contributions, unrealized loss on investments, and gain on sale of assets, HOC ended the fiscal period with a net loss of 1.6 million as compared to a net income of 3.4 million for the same period last fiscal year. We can scroll down to page 22 of 50. Thank you. The overall net decrease of 5 million in the adjusted net loss is largely driven by an increase in total interest expense due to interest on the Battery Lane acquisition loan with Eagle Bank, accrued interest on MV Gateway, mezzanine loan, and Bradley Crossings Eagle Bank loan, an increase in HAP expense due to an increase in leasing and leasing costs, decrease in dwelling rental income driven by the sale of the 3 Manor properties, HOC Grove Apartments and Georgian Court Silver Spring, a decrease in state and county grants, mainly due to a decrease in the Capital Improvements Program and County Main Public Housing Program, an increase in administrative expense driven by online information services, computer software, temp agency services, and division awards. A decrease in other income is partially due to a decrease in development fee income. This decrease is partially offset by an increase in HAP income due to an increase in HCV main program, emergency housing vouchers, mainstream program, incremental housing choice vouchers, and incoming portables. An increase in investment income is largely due to investments of the remaining bond proceeds. An increase in interest on mortgage and construction loans receivable, mainly due to an increase in the 2021 series CD mortgage loan receivable balance from HOC at Willow Manor, HOC at Shady Grove, and HOC at Georgian Court. A decrease in maintenance expense due to general fund and public fund computer equipment and computer software expenses related to application development and technical services. A decrease in utilities at Paddington Square, Barclay, Glenmount Crossing, Saturn Mill Apartments, and the sale of 3 Manor properties, Shady Grove and Georgian Court. If we could scroll down to page 24 of 50. Thank you very much. Similarly, when revenues from operations for FY23 and FY22 are adjusted for HAP income and unrealized loss investments, the adjusting operating revenues decreased by 3.2 million, largely due to the decrease in management fees and other income, dwelling rent, and county grants. We can scroll down just a tad bit to operating expenses adjusted. Great, thank you. When the operating expenses of when the operating expenses for FY23 and FY22 are adjusted for HAP expense, the adjusted operating expenses increase by 2.6 million from 78.7 million in FY22 to 81.3 million in FY23, primarily driven by interest expense and administrative expense. If we can scroll down to page 25 of 50. Thank you. The net operating net revenues totaled 2.1 million for the fiscal period ending December 2022, as compared to net income of 729,000 for the same period last year. This is attributed to an increase in non-operating investment income and interest on mortgage and construction loans receivable, partially offset by an increase in non-operating interest expense. This concludes the financial statement presentations. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them, commissioners. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions?
No, just a comment. We've got a lot to solve for in the next few months, so be looking forward to next quarter and see how that's going to work out.
Then I would entertain a motion for sending this forward to the full commission.
So moved.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Then it's approved. The next item to carry approaching then is the FY 2023 second quarter budget amendment. Turn it over and start it off. The Executive Director, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request for a minor amendment related to administrative costs savings and a reallocation of those savings related to our bond funds. I'll turn it over to both our acting chief financial officer, Tim Getzinger, and our chief budget officer, Terry Fowler.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Commission. And this next item will be presented by Terry Fowler, our Budget Officer.
Good morning. Each year at the end of the fiscal year, we look at the expenditures administratively in the single and multifamily bond. Those costs are covered by draws from the respective bond funds. And if there are savings in expenditures, the monies that were drawn that year are restricted, and we use those funds to reduce the draw that is needed in the following year. For the multifamily bond fund, there was a cumulative savings of $210,000 approximately. So the projected draw for fiscal 23 that was originally $2.3 million has been reduced to $2.1 million, and that difference will be covered by the savings that we carry forward. For the single family bond fund, there was savings of approximately 191 cumulative at the end of fiscal 22. So the anticipated draw of approximately $1.5 million for administrative costs in 23 will be reduced to approximately $1.32 million. And if you have any questions related to this, this is a pro forma item that we do every year. I'd be happy to address your questions.
Any questions? And I'll entertain a motion to send this forward to the commission with joining the staff with a recommendation for approval of the second quarter budget amendment.
I move that we send forward to the commission the second quarter budget amendment for fiscal year 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Then the motion is approved.
Thank you.
One comment I would have on well, actually all three of the items we've discussed. And this isn't a criticism, it's just a question. Is there a way for us, as we present these, I mean, very good detailed reports, but there's always a question about whether or not what we're presenting is good or bad, is expected or not expected. And I'd like to hear more qualitative opinions from the staff on these items. I mean, for instance, we just went through the financial statement and the decreases and increases. Standing alone, they don't necessarily mean anything. But the question, I think, really that I'm asking for some of the commissioners who don't follow this as closely as maybe the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee is, can we somewhere in the presentation suggest this is nothing unusual? I mean, not that nothing unusual, but that it's not concerning or to be taken care of or was anticipated. Just like I asked in terms of the budget actuals. If there was a shortfall, well, we expect it's going to be made up in the third quarter or the fourth quarter. That helps to put into context the very detailed report that you've given. So I'm not criticizing the report. I'm just trying to see if there's a way for commissioners and anybody else who might be looking at this to really put it into context, better understand. So I just offer that up as a suggestion.
Will do.
And yeah, I mean, relatedly, I think, in the past I've talked about whether it would be possible for us to develop some benchmarks. I know on a balance sheet that might be a little tough sometimes, but, ratios or, things that we are, that would indicate or might be flags for concern if we're not hitting certain benchmarks or ratios. I think would be helpful for a quick evaluation.
All right, the next item is thing that Chelsea started out talking about. Anyway, the uncollectible tenant account receivable. Something we have to face every quarter. It's not getting better.
And commissioners, this amount is nominal in comparison to the larger outstanding issue. This matter relates to residents who have either passed on, who've left out of state, might have moved to a nursing home, where we've had to write off their rent. I'll turn it over to our acting chief financial officer, Tim Getzinger, as well as Nilu Razi. Rozecki, thank you so much, Rozecki, accounting manager.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Commission. I do want to point out, we've been talking the last few quarters during this write-off process that we're looking to get a collections company. I want to report that we do have it. It is Assurant Global Housing. So that is the firm that we will be using. We've worked with them in the past. And so we will start reporting these. And the last few years, there is a statute of limitations of 3 years regarding collections. And so we're putting together that information and we'll start reporting that to that firm, and we'll provide to you what we have been able to learn, what we've been able to receive regarding these efforts in the next quarter, as well as the other items that you requested during this meeting. And with that said, Nilu Razigi will be presenting this item. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners and everyone. My name is Nilu Razegi. I will be presenting the uncollectible tenants receivable. The agency's current policy is to provide for an allowance for any tenant's accounts receivable balance which are older than 90 days. On a quarterly basis, the staff also recommend to the Commission the write-off uncollectible receivable from past tenants. The proposed write-off for the second quarter of fiscal year 2023 amounted to $49,000, an increase of $37,000 compared to the previous quarter. This period's write-off consists of $15,000 of bad debt from opportunity housing, $30,000 from supportive housing properties, and $4,000 from the 236 properties. The primary reason for the write-off across the property include tenants who passed away, no longer qualify for their respective housing program, were in non-compliance status with program requirements, moved to a nursing home, relocated out of state, skipped, and voluntarily vacated their units. After the full Commission's approval, the write-off is processed through Yardi's write-off function with the tenant detail placed into the uncollectible accounts receivable database. The next anticipated write-off will be for the third quarter of fiscal year 23, which will cover January 1st to March 30th, 2023. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I have one question, and this is pure curiosity. I appreciate all the information you're providing now about the reasons. I'm not clear the difference between skipping and voluntarily leaving. Is there?
I guess that just in reading this report, and I'm probably going to get this wrong. So skipping means they didn't give us any notice and they just left. Voluntarily leaving means that they did provide us with that information, but there was still a balance on the books. That balance is usually a lot smaller than somebody who skipped, but it's a great topic.
Thank you. The dollars are the same regardless. I just was curious as to the difference. Thank you.
Related to that, how is the program of using surety bonds working out?
So Assurant Global is the same company that provides those bonds. I don't have that information, but I can certainly get that.
We wanted to, and as a way to improve our collection, and reduce the strain on the residents in terms of having to do security deposits. And I just wonder generally how that's working out.
I'll provide you with that information.
If there are no more questions, I'll entertain a motion to join the staff's recommendation to send this forward to the full commission to authorize the write-off of uncollectible tenant account receivables.
I move that we send forward to the full commission staff's recommendation to write off uncollectible tenant accounts receivable. for this quarter.
So, I mean, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And then the motion is approved. The next item relates to the residences on the lane and HOC at Garnkirk Farms, and an extension of the line of credit reloan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is another item that I will turn over to our acting chief financial officer. It relates to an extension request.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Commission, and good morning. I will be presenting this item for the record. Tim Getzinger, Acting CFO and Chief Development Funds Officer. The Commission has previously approved advances from the PNC Bank Real Estate Line of Credit, also known as the RELOC, as an interim financing during the acquisition and construction of the Upton 2, which is now known as the Residences on the Lane, and to cover the pre-development expenses for HOC Garnkirk Farms, LLC. As of December 31st, 2022, total principal balance from these draws was about $7.6 million for the residences and $1.9 million for Garnkirk. The authorization from the Commission for the use of the PNC RELOC will expire on March 2023 and May 2023 for residences on the lane and HOC Garnkirk Farms, respectively. The estimated total annual cost related to these advances is approximately $442,850 based on PNC RELOC's contractual taxable borrowing rates. The requested extensions are coterminous with the PNC RELOC maturity date, which is September 30th, 2024. But balances are expected to be repaid prior to then. Residences on the lane is expected to repay the RELOC in the second quarter of calendar year 2023, so in the next couple of months, and Garnkirk in the summer of 2024. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So for residents on the lane, it says that permanent financing is scheduled for February.
It's very soon, yes, that's correct.
So, but we wouldn't be able to repay the, or use that for repaying the RELOC.
We will also substantial completion. Actually, sorry. It needs to reach stabilization and hit that for 3 consecutive months. And then certain fees are then repaid.
Lisa.
Yeah, it has to do with lease up. So there's certain benchmarks that we have to hit.
So we'll have the permanent financing available, but won't draw from it until.
Yeah, then we have to hit certain. Well, we have to hit certain benchmarks, and then fees come in, and both of those will be used to repay the PNC line of credit.
I mean, I don't have a problem with the extension. It's just curious. Like it seemed like we might be paying it off before the current term expires. Maturity date, but
yes, yeah.
But it sounds like it will actually go past March.
The next quarterly meeting isn't in for 3 months, and so if we weren't able to hit that particular benchmark, then we could be in potential problems with the timing of it. So better safe than sorry.
If there are no more questions, I'll entertain a motion to forward this to the full commission with our recommendation that they accept the staff's recommendation for approval.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved. The next item on the agenda is Cider Mill Apartments. The executive director will begin the presentation.
Thank you. Commissioners, this matter is before you related to roof repair that we need to address at Cider Mill Apartments. As you all know, this is a very large property, and there have been identified roofing issues along the way since we've obtained the property. The particular matter before you is unique in the sense that we are requesting permission to move forward with 4 additional flat roof repairs that were identified since the last time we received approval from the commission to move forward with those roof repairs. And so that change order is one that requires board approval. But there's also a second issue, and it's related to what's called the mansard roofs. And that's the shingles that are on the exterior of the roofs, more cosmetic than functional, in the sense that it does not pose any challenge to the residents. However, it was identified in a recent REAC inspection as something that we needed to address and repair. I'm framing it, the team will provide more context, but what I want to share is we are working diligently to communicate with and hopefully work with HUD to alleviate the responsibility and requirement of addressing the mansard roofs at this time. We do not believe that this is a good use of our resources, considering the high cost for the mansard roofs of almost $900,000, especially since they do not cause any health or safety hazards to residents. And I'm hopeful that with communicating with certain leadership there, we may be able to have some reprieve. If not, however, we will need to move forward quickly to not be out of compliance with our requirements with HUD. And therefore, the request that's being brought forward to this committee and then subsequently to the special board meeting that will happen immediately subsequent to this meeting is to seek some authority to move forward with those items, particularly the mansard roofs only if needed, if we're not able to get resolution with HUD. And with that, I will turn it over to our chief real estate. I'll turn it over to Marcus and Gio from our real estate team to provide additional details.
Thank you, Director Andrews. For the record, Marcus Irvin, Director of Development. I'm going to turn it over to Senior Financial Analyst, Gio Cavalazzi.
Thanks, Marcus. Gio Cavalazzi, Senior Financial Analyst at Real Estate. As the Executive Director provided a background in describing property, this is an old property, was built in 1971, and no significant roof repair or replacement work has been done since then. And so it has experienced some deterioration and leaking. It has flat roofs on all of its buildings, 72 buildings, and it's augmented by mansard roofs that surround it. And so in 2021, the property management and the HOC asset management developed a plan to address the immediate needs for the leaking flat roofs at the property. They identified 7 roofs and solicited proposals for those replacements. A contract was executed with Eastern Concrete Restoration at that time to do this work, and that work has been completed in November of 2022. In the meanwhile, in the process, the property management identified 4 additional roofs that have active leaks and need to be replaced. And so we asked the Eastern Concrete to provide us with a quote estimate for replacement. And they agreed to maintain the same per unit pricing, $116,000 per roof. And so our change order proposal for Eastern Concrete Restoration's contract is based on that amount, plus a 20% contingency for any unforeseen findings. So in addition to these, as the Executive Director mentioned, last year there was a REAC inspection of the property, and they identified missing and damaged shingles as one of the issues. And as HUD does in these kinds of cases, issued a notice of violation and asked the owner to remedy these issues as soon as possible. So to address this, we solicited proposals to replace shingles throughout the property. Unfortunately, the contractors told us that repairing these missing and damaged shingles is not possible, and they are not willing to do it because they cannot provide a warranty for patching of it. And so because these issues are spread throughout the properties, we would need to replace all of the mansard roofs at the property. So we obtained 4 proposals, and the lowest bidder is Vertex Roofing Contractors. Their price estimate for the replacement is approximately $820,000. And that is the second part of this procurement request. again, we would ask for a 20% contingency to be added to this amount, especially with mansard roofs, because we don't know the condition of the underlying structures. And there may be additional things that need to be replaced that are not included in this estimate. So if approved, including the contingency, the total amount of the requests for these two procurements is $1.540,464. And we request authorization to use the properties replacement reserve fund to pay for these repairs. But the fund currently has a just under $3.9 million balance available. And so if this work is completed and depending on the amount of contingency that is spent, the fund will have from $2.3 to $2.6 million remaining in the replacement reserve. And with that, I think that concludes our request, and I can answer any questions.
I'm curious with the mansard roofs, and I was going to ask about whether we could just do tile replacements, but you answered that question. So, but I guess larger question, this is still a 1971 roof. I don't know, like what is, and I'm all for seeing if we can, you know, if we don't need to make the repairs now, then, you know, doing it on our own time. But are we just delaying the inevitable? What do we expect the active life of this roof these roofs to be?
So the flat roofs will probably require replacement over time. These 7 initial ones plus the 4 additional ones have active leaks and they need to be done now. But the property management and HOC staff developed a plan to address any future issues to avoid emergency interventions. And so the proposal that we're still looking at, and we'll have a detailed plan coming back to the commission in the near future, in the next few months, to address these. But the proposal and the plan is to replace approximately 9 flat roofs per year going forward. And so the costs, the detailed costs and the funding options will be developed and presented to the commission at a later date.
But with the mansard roofs?
The mansard roofs, again, we'll have to, after the conversations with HUD, we'll have to determine if any other option is available. If we are,
but I guess in terms of like the mansard roofs, you're not including those in the plan for
9 per year.
Yeah. Right. So like what would be the plan for those roofs absent this these repairs?
One alternative is to somehow repair these missing shingles, since there is no leakage or damage, structural damage to the buildings from these missing shingles. And the contractors are unwilling to do it because of the warranty concerns. We may be able to do it ourselves or some other way to just fix the very obvious cosmetic issues and not.
But if HUD agreed with us that this were just a cosmetic issue at the moment, how long would we expect this roof to last before we needed to replace it?
I think we would need an additional engineering and maybe some a specialist would have to take off a couple of shingles in areas that are not damaged or cosmetically in bad condition and see what the actual underlying condition is, so we can come back to you with an update on that.
But we'd also do I'm sorry, I would say we also could also do a building by building approach for the mansard, just based on the.
Well, that's what I was going to ask actually. Like, are we doing that? I mean, it looks like we're looking at the flat roofs appropriately to make sure there's no leaks, but are we concerned that there's similar deterioration going on with mansard roofs that we're not aware of? And we've been caught in the past where we've had to approve these on an emergency basis, and we don't want to do that here. And again, I'm not saying like we should do it just for the sake of doing it, but I'm just wondering, how long would we expect these roofs? They're from 1971, so they're over 50 years old. And I don't know what the expected lifetime of a mansard roof is.
I would like to add on to your questions, if I may, and ask, are we considering redesigning the roofs if we're going to have to redo them all so that we don't have this mansard cosmetic but very expensive to repair and replace as part of the design of the roof?
We are not considering a design that would probably be too costly, but we are considering installing solar arrays on top of the roofs. We did some initial evaluation on that, and because of this age and the construction type of the property, we are the consultant that gave us an opinion couldn't give us a clear opinion whether they would support the weight of the arrays, but that's still in progress. We're going to be working with our consultants to determine if that is.
I do have a question on the solar, but I guess I still want it. But it doesn't sound like you have an answer right now.
Yeah, on the redesign, there would be a site plan issue included with it. So right now, maintaining that architectural and doing a replacement of it, developing a building by building approach would allow us to preserve that and also move forward and address the issues in a comprehensive way.
On the same subject, I'm still not sure I really heard the answer. I mean, we've got what, the 41 buildings in the development. Is that correct?
72 total.
72 total buildings. Okay. And we know that we had this roof problem, so we had to be doing emergency procurement. No work has been done on the roofs in 50 years. And we think we can wait and do 9 a year. I mean, that doesn't seem to make sense in terms. I mean, I've never heard of a roof that has a life expectancy of 50 years. I mean, they might say it now, but I'm sure in 1970 they weren't doing roofs that were lasting 50 years. Plus, flat roofs are different from the other. The other question, and this all gets to timing. We had a REACT inspection in January of 2022, and we're now doing emergency procurement on the finding that we had in January of 2022. I don't understand that. Why are we just getting to it?
And I can respond to that. Obviously, we've had multiple changes in staff. And so that has been one of the reasons why this was not on the front burner for us for a little period of time. But it does not alleviate the fact that we were aware of course, the flat roof issues. We have been working to get those issues resolved. And now we're working with HUD to see if we can have some leniency in regards to the mansard roofs. And I can address the commission individually in regards to kind of the staffing challenges that led to the delay, but that is the reason why those issues weren't addressed. The other issues identified in the REACT inspection have all been resolved. And so it's this outstanding contractual issue that was still pending, and which is why we're before you related to it at this time.
So I guess the other question, and I think Jeff asked it, we are in the process of developing a comprehensive plan to address both the flat roof and the mansard roof on all of those. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and I think your question is a good framework for that, which is that none of these things are neither the flat roofs nor the mansard roofs are gonna last for, a significant period longer. So this is really about, but because of the sheer size of the work, the cost of the work, ideas around solar and even potential, ideas around redevelopment. We just want to make sure that we basically lay out a realistic plan to cover these things that balances cost effectiveness, that balances, what we might do that could also bear some of the cost here or might obviate the need for some of the cost spent here. And then just the sheer scope of moving through 72 different routes on both fronts to make sure that we have the contracting capacity and resident, managing the resident experience through all this. So it's really a 9 per year is just based on both the contractor analysis as well as our recent experience with the number that are sort of, coming to sort of that crisis point each year. So I think it's really about deploying something over the next few years that completely takes care of this, but doing it in a way that, we're just trying to husband the funds as carefully as possible.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I'm glad that we are doing this plan, that we're, laying it out, so that, and presumably we're front loading anything that we think is closer to leakage or emergency situation. But same thing with the mansard roofs, which it doesn't sound like we've actually evaluated yet. And, in the past, we've had to pay more than we otherwise would have had to. Hopefully we won't be experiencing supply chain issues in the same way that drove up costs in the past, but, so that when we're approving things on an emergency basis, we end up paying more. I just want to make sure that if we're deferring, if we end up deferring on the mansard roofs, that we don't get caught in that situation again.
Yeah, and that is also, fold that in as well to the reason to try to be deliberate as possible here. I will say on the mansards, we have evaluated the mansard roofs ourselves. We do feel pretty comfortable that it is, as the executive director said, far more a cosmetic issue. We're not seeing the water infiltration coming through where those mansard roofs are. The other thing I would say is certainly these are old roofs, but these are also not the mansards aren't designed to really be protective. They're kind of, they're really more architectural in nature. And so, the flat roofs are obviously taking a beating, snow sits on top of it, things like that. So those, and then in this case, we have the added complexity of the former buyer having all those compressors on the roof as well. And we've done some evaluation for solar, and we've learned that that the roofs themselves were already sort of near a fine line without reinforcement. So these are some of the things that we've sort of got working around in our thoughts. And as Gio mentioned, we'll be back shortly to sort of fill in the gaps on the solar, any redevelopment ideas. But really the most important thing is how is this funding going to occur? How is this procurement going to occur each year to manage these things?
So relatedly, and again, I'm glad that we're exploring the solar option. And, in terms of paying, I assume we're going to be looking at the Inflation Reduction Act benefits that maybe that could help offset some of these costs.
Yeah, it's actually one of the big things that came out of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is this idea of direct pay. Whereas nonprofits, authorities, you can give us all the tax credits you want, not really useful to us. And so, as opposed to, for instance, Paddington Square was on a DC feeder line, and so it allowed us to use the DCS recs, which are very valuable in Maryland. They're like, I think, 1/10 or 15th of value. And so the economics were different. With this direct pay, for instance, it makes putting solar on properties like this much more economically sensible. Plus, you can include associated roofing costs, which is another reason.
Yeah, that's what I was going to, because it's one thing to pay just for the solar, but if the roof cell phone supported, you got to pay for that. So
right. So we have a firm that has a grant to provide this technical assistance for free, and so they're going to be looking at Ciderman will provide the analysis we need.
Any other questions or discussion?
I would still like to see some consideration of putting non-flat roofs over top of what's there. If that would create a situation that would allow us to keep the building dry and put solar on it, and might be cheaper than trying to fix what's there the way the structure is. I could be all wet on that, but I'd like to at least have somebody look at it.
Yeah, and I think obviously it's an enormous property, and so even if we were to redevelop the whole thing, it would take 20 years. So there's also it's very likely that we might come and say, hey, some of this property should be actually just a tax credit renovation. And so one of the things we could do as part of that is work with the planning department to understand what sorts of site plan amendments we would need. This property probably doesn't have a site plan, but it might. But what kinds of things we need to do to make sure that we can pull permits, because DPS will ask planning, did you approve this architecture? And so we would just need to answer that question. But as part of a major, even if it's part of a major renovation, then that would be something we could do as part.
Okay, thank you.
I would move, let's see. I would move that we support the staff recommendation to send to the full commission to approve the execution of the contracts for flat roofs and for mansard roofs. And approve the full funding.
Pending the final determination on the mentioned roofs. Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved. And there being no more items on the agenda, that concludes the meeting for today. We are now adjourned.